Hello, Judy. Here is Rough Draft Part 1. Let me tell you about Drew. Drew doesn't give a damn about the Pythagorean theorem, and the chances of making that formula adhere are slim. And he also doesn't care about that teacher who stands in the front of class barking orders and wants Drew to fear him. That same teacher who's been beaten down by a system so much that he's forgotten how to steer him away from being in that 20% of Americans who don't even make it through high school. And so that teacher vents in a teacher's lounge how Drew is a slouch and his indifference to geometry has nothing to do with how the teacher stands in front of the room for an hour and doesn't allow students to put their heads down on their desks, like that lazy Drew who bows out every single day 10 minutes into class. This teacher says that Drew is lazy. Well, Drew finds it hard to keep his head up in class because when you eat a meal once a day, keeping your brain conscious because a teacher says you will do what I say doesn't override the pangs in your stomach. That 45-minute lecture is not even going to leave a footprint. It's not even a distraction from the pain of that handprint that stings his back because he talked back to his mom's boyfriend. Have you considered that maybe the last thing on Drew's mind is your multiple choice test? And that he's more concerned with hiding the cuts on his wrist? Or making sure he leaves the back door of his house unlocked so he can hide his passed out mother drunk on his couch from all of his friends? His dad's been locked up since the age of 3. And that sits in the back of his mind where those test answers should be. And those bags under Drew's eyes are getting very heavy. So no. Drew is not interested in the Pythagorean theorem, and I think that teacher needs a large dose injection of truth serum, and admit the reason Drew does not speak up in class is because he doesn't think anyone will hear him, and that kids like Drew sit in your neat little rows like sheep, waiting for you to shear them for high test scores so you can keep the principal off your back. And if they can regurgitate enough facts on these standardized tests, the government might finally recognize you and bump up your paycheck, and so you stand in front of a whiteboard and make kids memorize texts. Meanwhile, Drew raises a metaphorical two-finger salute to the system that he keeps his head glued to a desk. Years of being kept chained to the steps of a broken ladder makes falling asleep in class visceral. And yet this teacher still expects him to remember that A squared plus B squared equals see me after class for making that two-finger salute literal. But here's a secret from someone who spends many hours with kids. Drew is not alone in this. Countless students from broken homes have broken bones that were never set by a doctor, and heads packed with unspoken woes that occupy a space behind their eyes that doesn't let them see through this eye that they are not more than sheep in stalls, a simple cog in a clock that hangs on a blank wall. And while that hour hand ticks between 8 and 3, you will have your butt in a seat, and raise your hand to speak, and I will tell you when you can eat. For homework, read textbook chapter 13, and I don't care if you think school is boring. School is boring. Our education system's main purpose is to create future citizens. The people who will run our country, pay our taxes, take care of our sick, care for the earth, create the innovations that will continue to move the human race forward. Such an important task, the most important task. And yet look at the current system. American education looks almost like nothing else in our modern society. In the late 19th and early 20th century, K-12 schools were designed to give students a basic education, mainly literacy, and prepare them for life in factories. It was the height of the Industrial Revolution, and children needed to learn how to stand in rows, react to a bell, follow orders from a single supervisor, and they needed to know how to deal with hours and hours of monotony. Standing on an assembly line and performing a single task was a very common thing to do 100 years ago, and the format for schools made a lot of sense. But here's the thing. Only 9% of jobs in the United States is in manufacturing, and the majority of those jobs do not entail standing in rows anymore, performing unskilled labor. Our society has changed. Now, there are many Drews who go to my school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, kids who are from very real poverty and abuse. I don't think their poverty is an excuse not to work hard and succeed. The world doesn't care if you are raised with little means or a rough life. It will tear you up all the same. But there is a reality that the dominant means of education is not enough to distract a child from being hungry, or from intense anger, and for bruises, and from having a repugnant body odor from not showering for a few days. Many of the students I encounter who live in poverty are not captivated by the system we have in place. There are other things that occupy their brains and bodies that obstruct what school is trying to accomplish. And it doesn't matter how loud a teacher yells, or even how much money we pour into education, which I should mention is the highest in the world per student. This system is unproductive, outdated, and boring. How can we honestly expect to hold any student's attention long enough to instill useful knowledge and skills with the kind of schools that dominate the education landscape? And I'm not just talking about impoverished adolescents, I'm talking about any kids. We have all of this data that people cannot effectively sit still for any certain amount of time, and yet we still make young students with very short attention spans sit in desks for 8 hours and not speak. I can't even do that. It's taking all of my strength to have the attention span to stand here and talk for 15 minutes. Ooh, a butterfly. And so what do we do to motivate them to work? Grades. A letter or number used to indicate the quality of a student's work. Commonly used as leverage to make students pay attention or work hard and go to school every day. Unfortunately, I know hundreds of students who don't care about grades. They're not motivated by letters that adults use to designate how much they know or have learned. Students know grades are used to measure their worth and to measure how effective a school is, and that they get their teachers pay raises and keep their parents off their backs. They're not stupid. Now, I'm not saying grades aren't important or even necessary. I'm just saying from first-hand experience, the majority of students I encounter don't care about them and are not motivated to work hard for them. Yet this is the primary way schools try to motivate students to succeed. That's how you move from grade level to grade level, how you get into college, and yet it doesn't get kids excited about learning. Perhaps this is why 20% of Americans don't even graduate from high school. Grades are not enough of a motivator to keep over 1.2 American children from quitting school every year. 7,000 kids a day. Maybe this is why 1/3 of college students don't even make it to their sophomore year. American education uses a broken tool to motivate their citizens to become properly educated. And they do this in a system and a format that is boring. And here's another reality I've noticed as a teacher. Kids get bored very easily. And if they are bored and there's nothing to motivate them from checking out, they will check out. What kind of job does someone speak at you for 7 hours a day? I've never had a job interview where the interviewer asked me, "What year did the French Revolution begin?" School doesn't take place in the real world. Our primary system to prepare people to be successful adults exists in an alternative reality. And I believe this is the reason why the education system is failing. But what if you can do something in the classroom that takes a student's thoughts away from their poverty, or away from their parents' divorce? Something that overrides their pain and emotions, overrides the importance of the cell phone that never leaves their hand, and all of the selfies and Snapchatting that goes along with it. Hold on a second, I'm going to address my students watching this video right now. Put your phone away. What if every day kids were not forced to sit in silence with their thoughts? I work at a school that emphasizes project-based learning. We attempt to merge this alternate reality with the real world, making education authentic. We take the state and national content standards that students are required to learn and retain and figure out ways for students to learn these content standards in a real and authentic way. For instance, I teach a social studies and English class simultaneously to high school freshmen. One of my major history standards covers the Industrial Revolution and the growth of manufacturing and urbanization, and ultimately what effect this revolution had on society and culture. Very typical history standards for a high school class. Once I read through a standard, I try to identify a theme. In this one, I see this concept of modernity and the rapid advancement of human innovation. Then I sit down with the people I work with and try to figure out how I can use this theme and make it real for my students. Here's a thought I had during one brainstorming session. Thousands of refugees enter America every year, many of them from the developing world, and have very little experience with our modern culture. When they step off that airplane from Kenya into Grand Rapids or San Antonio, they're experiencing their own industrial revolution in a matter of minutes rather than decades. Well, I thought of this connection and decided to contact a social work agency in the area to see if there were any refugees who would be willing to share their experience of coming to America with my class. On a Monday morning at 7 a.m., Beth Lisa came and spoke to my class. She talked about losing her entire family to violence in the Rwandan genocide and fleeing to a refugee camp in Kenya where she lived for over a decade on nothing more than rice and corn. And then one day she was put on an airplane and without the slightest clue to where she was going ended up in Grand Rapids. She landed in January, which let me tell you is just the most beautiful and pleasant of months in Michigan. Well, Beth Lisa had never worn a jacket before. She shared how she didn't speak English, didn't know how to use a light switch, had never seen a toilet in person. She didn't know what to eat from a grocery store. She once got on a city bus and didn't know how to signal that she needed to get off. And so she stayed on that bus all day until the driver reached the end of his route and made Beth Lisa get off. In January, during a snowstorm. My students couldn't believe what they were hearing. When Beth Lisa left that morning, they talked with each other and then came to me and asked if they could make flashcards for refugees on how to use appliances, and how-to videos for how to use the bus system, and cookbooks on how to make basic American meals. And Emily said her dad works in a factory and she could make a how-to video for factory safety and use Google to translate it to Swahili. And this is what we did for a few weeks. And while we did this, we also studied the history of food production and the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and learned how people reacted to these innovations way back in history and compared it to how people react to new innovations today. And at the end of this unit, the class presented their products to this social work agency. And now if you go into the waiting room at Bethany Christian Services, you will see a refugee-friendly bus map made by Damien and Tim hanging on the wall, and a how-to video playing on loop that Samantha and Maya created for refugees to watch while they wait. And in a side room every week, there's a group of teenage refugees that meets, and at the first of these meetings, they play a video that Drew made about making friends in America. Oh, also at the end of this unit, the students took a test on the Industrial Revolution and also write a 5-paragraph expository essay. And if you ask any of the kids in my class what modernity means, they'll be able to tell you. Not because they memorized the definition, but because they saw it with their own eyes. They experienced it. Because it was not me or grades or even the content that drove this unit. It was helping people like Beth Lisa. My students also interviewed 25 World War II veterans and filmed their experiences. Then they created documentaries about the veterans and gave them to their families to preserve their stories forever. And we also had a red carpet event in downtown Grand Rapids where proud World War II vets were the guests of honor, and over 400 community members showed up to see what some 14-year-olds created. Or when an algebra teacher at my school had to teach about exponential growth and had his students create superhero comic books with stories and illustrations that demonstrated the Common Core content standards. And then his students loaded up on a bus and took them to a children's hospital where they gave their hard work away. I found that if students go to school to do real work, creating real change in their communities, are given real purpose and a real reason for getting up at 6 a.m. every day, asking them to write an essay about it, or stay awake in class, or more than anything to strive to be better, is not that big of a deal. There's a reason that when the county I live in gave students a test to measure engagement, the percentage of highly engaged kids at my school doubled, the second highest school in my 21-district county. There's a reason students in our network of schools that lives by the same philosophy graduate high school at a rate 14% higher than the national average, and score significantly higher on all standardized tests. What if when parents research schools to place their children in, instead of asking what the school's test results are, they ask what kind of authentic projects the biology class is working on? Or what businesses does the geometry class collaborate with? What if grades were secondary to college admissions, and what they really want to see is a student's portfolio and what they created in middle and high school? We need a paradigm shift. School isn't a game to the kids at my school, or hoops to jump through, or even an obligation. It's authentic. It's the real world. It can pick Drew's head up off his desk and burn a fire behind his pupils that just needed a match to ignite embers that were smothered by a cold, dull rain. A blaze to cut through the haze that he was in. And some might say it was just a phase when he skipped school. And others that he's reached a point in his life where it's too late. He's a bad kid. And so we should either medicate him for his ADD or just sit him in the back of the room where we can just let him fall asleep. We need to let him out of his rows and stop making school about what he knows, but instead who he can serve or what he can create. So he can set his pain and anger aside long enough to learn that what his parents did to him, or what his last teacher called him, or what this world has labeled him is not true. Because you see, Drew is the seed of a redwood planted in the desert. A flat and dry land with suffocating sand is no place for this cone to split its shell and let its roots swell into the ground. And so the seed is latent, not dead, a sort of coma. But there are cells locked in this seed, If only they could escape this ill-suited terrain, would multiply with sun and rain, and paint the sky with a dark shade of green no forest has ever seen. Within this seed is an unrealized canopy just waiting to climb the atmosphere. Its roots would turn and twist into the topsoil so that no storm could ever have enough force to push it over again. And as it grew older and its bark became so thick that not even fire could bring this tree down, birds could nest in its boughs. Seeds of its own could flourish from its strong limbs, and this tree would grow tall the way nature intended. But someone planted this seed in the desert. And until a rare cloud floats by and creates a stream to carry this seed to somewhere that supports life, it will continue to be dormant, and we will never see this redwood